So Destiny more than ever before is focusing on build crafting, whether that be for PvE or PvP. Today I'm going to show you how you can maximize the stats in your builds and aim for triple 100 or even quadruple 100 builds so that you can get the most out of all the builds you make. A lot of you guys out there are wondering, how can we farm high stat armor in the specific stats that we want? Is there a way to target this, and what activities are best to run so that we can guarantee those drops? So I'm going to be covering how armor stats in the game work, which will be useful for veterans and newbies alike, so that we can force the game into dropping the stats that we want. And then we'll be covering the various activities high stat armor is guaranteed from, yes, guaranteed, so that you are not at the mercy of RNG. Timestamps are in the description below. If you find anything what I talk about today useful within this video, then remember to like it, as that helps me out a ton. So for most PvE builds for all three classes, you want to prioritize 100 resilience, as this provides 40% damage reduction. The single most important thing to survive endgame content is to take less damage in the first place. Next, you want 100 recovery so you can get back into the action faster and regenerate your health quicker. And finally, 100 discipline. Grenade builds tend to be some of the strongest in PvE and PvP, but if you wanted strength for a melee focused build, then that doesn't matter, as the trick I'll show later in the video will cover 100 strength as well. So you'll end up with 100 resilience, 100 recovery, and then 100 discipline or strength depending on what you go for. For resilience and recovery, you tend to gain an exponential benefit the more stats you have invested, so pushing your gear from 9 to 10 is going to provide a massive benefit, which is why triple 100 builds are so coveted. Take for example resilience, which goes from 32% damage resist at 9 to 40% damage resist at 10, which is a whole 8% increase, more so than any tier below it. For hunters specifically, especially in PvP, you may want to ditch the resilience for more mobility so you can dodge more often, but again this won't matter too much, as the method I'm going to show you will cover this as well. As you can see with my Athos Embrace build, I've got 100 mobility, 100 recovery, and 100 strength with 90 discipline here, which is near optimal for this build. Intellect, since the changes they made recently, just isn't a stat that's worth investing into anymore. It's actually easier to get your super back with more primary shots than stacking intellect per se. So let's go over how our stats actually work. So stats are actually divided into two discrete groups. The top three stats, mobility, resilience, and recovery, are one group. The bottom three stats, discipline, intellect, and strength, are another. When the game drops high stat armor, it tends to have 3 stat spikes. You can get a maximum of 2 of the 3 stat spikes within one of those groups I mentioned before. So it's impossible to get an armor piece, for example, that has a stat spike in all 3 from one group, say mobility, resilience, and recovery, as they're in the same group. So how do we force the game to give us the stats we want? Well, you can use a ghost mod that prioritizes a certain stat. For most builds out there, I recommend using a discipline ghost mod so that one of the stat spikes is in discipline, which the mod guarantees, and then the other 2 stat spikes are hopefully in the top stat group, which are where the more desirable stats lie. The reason I recommend doing it this way rather than choosing recovery armorer or resilience armorer, which is what I was using for the longest time, is because when I was using those mods, the other 2 stat spikes were coming from the bottom group of stats, the less desirable stats. So it became very difficult for me to have a triple 100 build in the stats that I needed. Like I said, if you're going for a melee build, then choose strength armorer on your ghost mod instead of discipline. Again, this will force, hopefully, the other 2 stat spikes to be in either mobility, resilience, or recovery. So we're going to put this in action and show you where you can get fast high stat drops for very little currency. The best place I'd recommend is the war table vendor in the Helm, which uses the currency Risen Energy. The best part about Risen Energy is that it can drop from raids, dungeons, and regular playlist activities like Crucible and Gambit, so you don't have to run the seasonal activity for it once you have this upgrade. Which means most people tend to always have a max stack of it passively. The other upgrade you need is this one right here, which lets you get high stat armor from Umbral Decryption. So once you have those, go to the war table, go to the second page, and go to the Umbral Focusing Armor section. I'm going to get 4 pieces here and show you what I mean. Alright, so let's have a look at these armor pieces. We've got the Discipline armor and mod on, so let's see what happens. So our first piece actually has 27 Discipline, very little Intellect and Strength, which is good. But then we got a high spike in Mobility and Resilience in the other two stats. If this was Resilience and Recovery, this would have been perfect for my Titan. But I don't really need the Mobility for my Titan. Okay, let's go over the next one. The next piece of armor, it's got fairly high Discipline and then Resilience and Recovery, a good amount of it as well. So that's actually quite good. Unfortunately got a little bit of Strength, but it's not perfect, but it's getting there. So I would keep that piece. Then the chest piece. This isn't that good. There's a lot of Intellect there, which we don't need. But yeah, that piece isn't that great. And then finally our boots. Let's have a look at the boots. So again, probably a bit too much Strength for my liking, and a bit too much Mobility. So again, not a terrific piece. I think the example I want to give you is probably this one. Like, there's a very high Discipline, very high Mobility and Resilience, and very little stats in the other three stats. Unfortunately, got the spike in Mobility, but if it was in Recovery, if you had 16 Resilience, 16 Recovery, 27 Discipline, and then 2 Mobility, 2 Intellect, and 2 Strength, would have been a perfect piece for my Titan. But this isn't a bad piece. I'm going to keep this, and I'm definitely going to keep the gloves as well, because they've got the 3 stat spikes in Resilience, Recovery, and Discipline, which is what I want. The other 2 seasonal vendors from Season 17 and 18 don't actually have an upgrade that guarantees high stat armor from Decryption, so I wouldn't use your Umbrella Engrams there particularly. Otherwise, in terms of other sources of high stat armor, your seasonal pass has 4 pieces of high stat armor near the end of the season pass for each character, so I recommend highly picking those up every season. Each season the stat spike is different for each of the armor pieces, so eventually you'll have a good enough collection where when you mix and match different pieces, you'll get the builds that you want. Most other sources of high stat armor are actually locked out to once a week, so things like Iron Banner, the Raid, or Pit of Heresy. The reason why I like Pit of Heresy is because the final boss always drops an armor piece rather than a weapon, so you're guaranteed once a week a high stat armor piece. So there you have it guys, my method to guarantee fast and easy high stat armor drops. If you enjoyed what I talked about today, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more Destiny content, both PvE and PvP. I'm Mr. Ronnet, that's it for today, peace out guys.